Anyway, so Richard Dawkins is being cancelled again because he decided to say something sensible, and he actually hit a really raw nerve in progressive circles here, and this is probably the Achilles heel of intersectionality and will bring the whole thing down. So he tweeted out this in 2015, and I don't know why, by the way. I have no idea why Richard Dawkins, in the current year, was just sat there with his cup of tea and was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tweet about transgenderism. How could this go wrong? Things I'd say. I liked Richard Dawkins. I'm a fan of Richard Dawkins. I was a fan of the New Atheists back in the day. And so I have absolutely no ill will. And he has, in ways, stood up to the progressives. So I do respect the man. So I find this a bizarre thing for him to just randomly tweet out one morning. He says, in 2015, Rachel Dolezal, a white chapter president of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, was vilified for identifying as black. I like the way he used the capital B, black, there. That's proper. That's correct from progressive viewpoints. Political black. Some men choose to identify as women, and some women choose to identify as men. You will be vilified if you deny that they literally are what they identify as. Discuss. And this went about as well as you might have expected, and so he had to follow this up with a reply tweet saying, I did not intend to disparage trans people. I see that my academic discuss question has been much misconstrued as such, and I deplore this. It was also not my intent to ally in any way with Republican bigots in the US, now exploiting the issue. Ah, yes. Virtue signalling against Republican bigots will definitely get you uncancelled, Doctor. But what Dawkins has hit upon here is something called the Hypatia controversy. Now, Hypatia is an academic feminist journal, and this was an article that was published by Rebecca Tuvell, who wrote an article called In Defense of Transracialism. Now, you can imagine how this is all going, because the thrust of it is to make the argument that, hang on, if we're saying that someone can take an immutable biological category, like sex, and decide through force of will to say, actually, I'm going to adopt the gender expression of the opposite biological category, then what exactly prevents someone from doing this with race? And the answer is nothing. The answer is this is exactly correct. You are using precisely the same logic, with precisely the same premises, and there's no particular reason that a white person, therefore, cannot identify as a black person. If a woman can identify as a man, if a man can identify as a woman, and if various other forms of identity can exist. And so the main thing here is, she says, since we should accept transgender individuals to change sexes, decisions to change sexes, we should also accept transracial individuals' decisions to change races. If you agree with progressive logic, then the should there, I suppose, is correct. And therefore, the answer is, yeah, you kind of have to, which really undermines a lot about progressiveness. And it caused an absolute meltdown at the time, because no, I don't think they were really expecting anyone to make this logical connection, which is weird. But the thing is, the argument against it from the left, from the intersectionals who are trying to prevent this from being an accepted argument is, well, if you didn't grow up with black people's lives and experiences and you can just return to being white, you're not black and I don't like it, right? And that is identical to the TERF argument about men transitioning to become women. And of course, as anyone who follows any of this will know, the TERFs, the trans-exclusionary radical feminists, or just feminists, traditional gender-critical feminists, as we would call them, have been totally anathematized by the intersectional left. These are bigots on par with Hitler and must be treated as such, and have been deplatformed in many ways from many different places, and are just treated like absolute dirt, even though, I mean, are they wrong?
I mean, they're class traitors for siding with biology.
Yeah. And biology is counter-revolutionary. And so this is the Achilles heel of intersectionality. So the solution that the intersectionalists have is just not talk about it. You deny the argument can even be raised. And this is why the humanists have reacted as they did. Because Richard Dawkins is saying, well, what's stopping it? And they're like, oh, that's it, cancelled. From the Wikipedia, right, article about this controversy, Tuvel and the article came under attack on Facebook and Twitter, and she was called a transphobic, racist, crazy, stupid, and she was accused of having engaged in, quote, epistemic violence. That's an amazing term. Epistemology is how we know things, so it's how we gain our knowledge. How could that possibly be considered to be a form of violence?
Because it's heresy.
Exactly, that's it. That's the only way. You gained knowledge in a violent way. By what? Following a pattern of logic we already use. So that pattern of logic must already then be violent. So transgenderism is violence against the TERFs? Or the TERFs are violence against the trans people? I mean,
this is why speech is violence.
This is why speech is violence. Several feminists refer to her as a Becky, which is a slur for white women. So racist. And the article was called Violent Crap and Whack S. Basically, there was a massive meltdown. They absolutely lost it. And so Richard Dawkins, blundering into this, has found himself on the negative side of the American Humanist Association. And their board has decided to retract the Humanist Award he was given in 1996. So 25 years ago, Richard Dawkins was awarded Humanist of the Year for promoting scientific discourse and humanist values, and they turn around 25 years later and like, what? You don't think you think that white women can become black women? You're out. Okay, lunatics.
What happens to all your board members or anyone who was a humanist before then as well? Because they've all believed the same thing.
Yeah, they gave Richard Dawkins the award. They must all be bad people too. Weird, it only stops there. But anyway, they say, regrettably, Dawkins has over the past several years accumulated a history of making statements that use the guise of scientific discourse to demean marginalized groups and approach an approach antithetical to humanist values, with a link, and we'll go into that in a second. His latest statement also implies that the identities of transgender individuals are fraudulent, while also simultaneously attacking black identity as one that can be assumed when convenient. What are you saying there, right? Okay, so if Richard Dawkins is saying, well, hang on, if we can apply transgender ideology for women to men or men to women, then that logic can be applied to black to white and white to black, and that is an attack on transgenderism and the black identity. So, okay, but don't you see that you are the ones who have completely set the ground to destroy both of these things? But Dawkins is the bad guy because he dare mention it. You're not allowed to talk about this. His subsequent attempts to clarification are inadequate and convey neither sensitivity nor sincerity. Apparently Dawkins was right. You will be vilified. That's exactly. He was like, "Oh, you'll be vilified for this." Yes, you will. And the funny thing about this is when they tweeted this out, all the replies were, "You're engaging in a moral panic." Yes, they are. They're engaging in a moral panic because there is no logical resolution to this that doesn't also destroy black activism in the same way that women's rights activism has been destroyed. They are absolutely terrified of the implication of this. But I found it interesting how they link to the humanist values. And if we can go to the next one, John, it's like the 10 commandments of humanism, and they call them the 10 commitments. It's like, that's very, very secular. These are altruism, critical thinking, empathy, environmentalism, ethical development, global awareness, humility, peace and social justice, responsibility, service and participation. Thanks, I hate it. Right? I hate it. So, it sounds good on the surface, doesn't it? They all sound good. But peace, peace and social justice. But what if I'm not in favour of pacifism? Because that's essentially what they're saying. And social justice, obviously,
we're against justice, the humanists.
Yeah.
We're for social justice.
I will help people solve problems and handle disagreements in ways that are fair to everyone. Sometimes what's fair is that the criminal gets his just punishment. Sometimes it's fair that someone gets hanged. Right?
Black lady stabbing another black girl gets shot. It was fair that she got shot.
Exactly. But is that social justice? Well, I guess not.
From a left-wing perspective, of course not.
Exactly.
Because she's black and the cop's white. That's it.
Exactly. But the thing is, point 2 was critical thinking, and this is really hilarious that the humanists would appeal to their own 10 commandments because they are actively denying critical thinking, because that's what Richard Dawkins was doing. He was saying, well, hang on a second, why doesn't this apply to this if it also applies to that? And
Literally,
they're like... Discuss, and they're like, stop thinking. How dare you? This is a piece of sacred text that you cannot question. Say the American Humanist Society. Absolutely amazing, right? And then we get a statement from the vice president of the American Atheists, who also says, we need science communicators like Richard Dawkins to put in the time to learn this information and then communicate it accurately and clearly to the public, not reinforce dangerous and harmful narratives put forward by the opponents of equality. What are you talking about? He was just like, I want some logical consistency in the propositions I'm being presented with, and you're not showing any of it. And what are you saying in response? Don't question this. He didn't even make like a proper assertion. He was like, hey, what do you think of this? It was a discuss. Trans people are, of course, attacked across the country. A record number of fatal attacks against trans and gender non-conforming people, the majority of whom were black and Latina trans women, those most at risk. Attacked by who? Moving on. And they finish with given the repercussions for the millions of trans people across this country in this one life that we have to live as an atheist and a trans woman, I hope that Professor Dawkins treats this issue with greater understanding and respect in future. Thank you for that input, obviously sane person. The only good response, well, actually, there were a lot of good responses to this. So I have to give the non-woke atheists their due credit here because they deserve it. Because there was a general and a very quite broad response and rejection of the American Humanist Association. The first one, though, is a group that I'd like to promote, which is Atheists for Liberty, which is how I describe myself if I had to put that kind of label on it. Where do you fall? Well, I'm an atheist and I want liberty. End of story. So, and I have to say, their position was exactly the same as mine, really. Dawkins' tweets were not bigotry against those who identify as transgender, nor anyone in any particular racial group. From the perspective of an open-minded individual such as Dawkins, he was merely questioning these topics from a rational, scientific perspective. Just from a perspective that demands logical consistency, which you would think would be the scientific, rational, atheist view. Atheists for Liberty stands in support of Richard Dawkins and the many millions of atheists who share his perspective, which I'm sure they do. In the years leading up to the division within the atheist community and the resulting loss of influence for atheism, and I think that's true, Dawkins was attacked by woke extremists and movement infiltrators. These attacks, once launched by mere bloggers, turned into condemnations and negative actions by large organizations. The latest attack is from the American Humanist Association Board of Directors with their decision in 2021 to withdraw the 1996 Humanist of the Year award given to Dawkins. Additional attacks were recently published against Dawkins by other organizations, going down a path that will only lead to the continued decline of the movement of atheism. And they're right. They're absolutely right. The atheist movement was complete. It was very, very powerful 20 years ago. 10, 20 years ago. Very powerful. Now it's nowhere. It's nothing and no one cares about it. Why? Because it was ruined by social justice activists who are bringing in a particular ethical view of the world that leads to us saying you're not allowed to think. How dare you question this thing? But more than that, though, why did atheism collapse into social justice? It's a very long answer to this question that I'm not going to answer here, but to summarize it, it's the purely materialistic view of atheism that has of the individual that was used to eject God, the supernatural, has also been used to eject the metaphysical conception of the individual. And there is a metaphysical conception of the individual. This is where the atheists went wrong, but this is why the left can rush in with its purely materialistic Marxist garbage and go, yeah, let me tell you about black bodies. No, tell me about black people. I mean, the very term people, a person, is more than merely the material atoms of the thing. And this is the problem. And maybe they couldn't avoid it, but maybe it's something that's untenable and will demand that atheism continues to collapse into social justice unless an alternative secular view of what it is to be a human is presented. But again, I won't go into it here. Let's go to some of the reactions. So you got most of the sort of new atheist reactions were along the line of Steven Pinker's. As you can see here, he's got a page-long letter, very sensible, very well thought out. I could co-sign absolutely every statement here. It's, points out that Margaret Sanger is a eugenicist. She has the Humanist Award. Alice Walker, a notorious anti-Semite, still has a Humanist Award. Richard Dawkins, could we finish this line of logic, please? There goes your Humanist Award, because we're for critical thinking, right? But the best one, without a doubt, was Sam Harris, who is becoming my favourite remaining new atheist. Bold move for a struggling organisation. When everyone has forgotten you exist, why not remind them by committing suicide? That is Trumpian in its eloquence. Failing American Humanist Association. That's basically what he said. It's so good. That's such a backhander. And then you got people like Toby Young, who are the, I suppose is an atheist himself, presumably, who's also a free speech activist and member of the Free Speech Union.
Director of the Free Speech Union.
Director. And he obviously, well, if people disapprove of what Dawkins had to say, why not debate him? And the answer is, of course, because that would destroy all of social justice, and they can't have that, because suddenly it would be acceptable for me to identify as black. And so if I wore blackface, they couldn't accuse me of being a white man. It would be great. It's never going to happen. But yeah, again, props to Sam Harris for the absolute best response to this. I was just feeling humanist association. Love it.
Why not kill yourself? Literally KYS response.
Remind everyone you exist by committing suicide. So good. I love it. But anyway, that's what's happening with Richard Dawkins, why he's in trouble, and why the woke mob are going at him so hard. They have no choice but to go at him this hard, and they can't think about what it is that he said. If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 p.m. UK time on lotuseaters.com.